Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Power of Perception Pro Wrestling Radio Network. Welcome to those of you who are new. Welcome back to those of you who are seasoned veterans of what we do around here. What we do around here is we give a spotlight to independent wrestling and independent wrestlers, but also legends from yesteryear. I am Scott Golden, the originator of the network, and tonight we're going to be joined by one of the best in the world, but not necessarily wrestlers, ring announcers this time. Gary Michael Cappeta will be with us. Been around since the 70s with the WWF, WCW, AWA. Got a book of his own and a one-man show for people to check out. Really excited because if you are a part of the sport or you like old school wrestling, Gary probably is the voice you grew up with in a lot of ways. So we're going to merge that call now. Gary, are you with us?
I am. How are you?
Doing very well. Thank you so much, sir, for taking time out of what I'm sure is a super busy schedule. I know you do teaching now, but there probably isn't much you haven't done, no?
Well, I did take an early retirement from teaching, and I'm focusing totally on my stage show tour right now. So I've got 2 more dates over the next couple of weekends. And then this old guy's going to relax a little bit.
All right. So starting out in the 70s, very different in a world of professional wrestling to what it is today. And I'm sure most of our fans are familiar with your work, but if they're not, if you could give them a capsulized version of what they need to know if they're late to the party.
Oh, okay. Well, the chronology would be for 11 years, I worked with WWF, which became the WWF, that meaning the McMahon family. Vince McMahon Sr. was, when I started, he was in charge, and when I finished, Vinny Jr. was in charge. And then from there, I went on with the AWA to announce the first pro wrestling show on ESPN. It was the first national broadcast with which I was involved. Then I slowly transitioned over to the NWA and Jim Crockett Promotions, which became WCW, owned by Turner Broadcasting. And a little while after I finished that, I wrote my book, and then I became the backstage interviewer for Ring of Honor in the infancy of that promotion. So that brings you through the history of GMC.
Good God. I mean, so many miles covered there. Most people familiar with you for your work, I would assume, in WCW/the NWA, but you give a lot of credit, if not the majority of it, to the late, great Gorilla Monsoon with helping you break into the sport. Give us a little bit of that background and how that all came together for you.
Well, when I began, and I had no intention of being a performer in pro wrestling, all I simply wanted to do was to get into the matches for free. So, and announcing was not on my radar. I had gotten a press pass, and I wrote a few articles, and within 4 months, they didn't have an announcer. I volunteered, and as far as I knew, Gorilla Monsoon was a wrestler, but little did I know he was a part owner of Capital Wrestling, which was the business entity behind the WWF. So I was actually working for him. I didn't even know it. I wasn't allowed anywhere near the wrestlers for the first 2 years, not allowed in the locker room. It was a very closed society. But at the end of the first summer, when I worked with that group, which was a weekly wrestling program, a live event, not TV, he called me and asked me if I would be interested in continuing with him. And I didn't think I could do it, and he said, yeah, you can. So I had just started teaching at the time, and so 2 years to the day of that 4th of July weekend, when I had started with them, he approached me again and asked me if I was interested in doing their TV show. I did not know at the time that he was the producer of all WWF TV. So he put me on TV. So for 11 years, 9 of which I was on WWF broadcasts, if it wasn't for him, I would have not enjoyed my 43-year association with the sport.
Explain to people, obviously most of us take, I think, the ring announcer and sometimes even the commentators, your play-by-play in color, ladies and gentlemen, for granted. What is the true role of a ring announcer? To me, it's more than saying the names. It's also gauging the interest of the crowd, bringing them up and bringing them down. What goes into that?
Well, it's evolved over the years, but my brand of ring announcing is to add a texture to the event that folks are seeing. At the time when I was broadcasting, it made a difference who wrestled whom. And when the competitors were coming to the ring, there was a feud, there was a rivalry that needed to be settled. So you can, just with the tenor of your voice, paint a wrestler as someone that we would support or someone that we would disdain without saying that. That's not the same today, but that's what I did when... And I always, once I settled into a ring introduction for a wrestler, it was always the same. It was always the early days of Sting. This is Sting. The Steiner brothers, Rick Steiner, Scott Steiner, the Steiner brothers. And people are comfortable with repetition. And one of my goals was that when you saw Sting, and you remember the last time that you saw him either at a live event where I announced or a broadcast where I officiated, you heard my voice. Like later, when you were driving home, you heard my voice when you thought of Sting. You heard my voice when you heard Ric Flair, when you thought of Ric Flair. So essentially that's what I did. It was, and then off camera, in order to get the folks up for the show so that when we went on the air, people were on their feet and they were screaming and their arms were waving. There are little techniques to use to get the folks riled up for the night's event. So at the time that I was doing it, that's basically what I did. Then there were also the nights when the competitors that folks had paid to see weren't going to be there. There was a change in the card. So you have to break the news to them, and then there's a little magic that you try to make by having the folks believe that what they were going to see instead was even greater and better than what they bought their ticket to see. So, there are a lot of different... and then I had other tasks. I was in charge of the music on the road. I produced market-specific commercials for them. I did the commentary for the Spanish edition of WCW. So there were a lot of different things that I wound up doing that were a lot of fun.
Suppose I asked you a difficult question, and that is, how many live matches do you think you saw, just an estimate, over the course of your career?
Oh, I have that number. I'm trying to in the introduction to my stage show. There's a video that's a recap of my career, and it's close to 15,000.
Good gosh, that's a lot of wrestling. So my question was something like that. Did it ever get to be to where it got predictable for you, or was there always a different way that you approached each performance, each event? Were there certain towns you loved more than others? Well,
before the advent of the internet, when we would be touring, many times for 3 weeks, we would be touring with the same show. But the folks in Baltimore didn't know that the folks in Los Angeles had just seen that show, or the folks in Chicago didn't know the people in Houston had just seen the show. So there was a commonality in that way, but then in actually the performance, anything can happen. It's live theater. So there are always variables. Who would know when a fan would storm the ring, or who would know when a wrestler fell wrong, or who would know when, in my case, when the sound system would go down. So it was unpredictable in that way. But as far as the shows go, they would transition about every 3 weeks. And I'm not saying that every card was exactly the same, but your main events played out, your rivalries played out over 3 weeks to a month. So those top matches were pretty much the same.
And not only that, obviously rings breaking, another factor, or injuries, I would assume, is a factor. Were there ever nights where you had to cover for, and I'm leading you in a direction here, but nights you had to cover for unexpected injury that caused either the event, the card to change or slow down, or, hey, we need to get medics in here and we need to keep the crowd. How do we do that?
Absolutely. I mean, there was one night in Philadelphia at the Philadelphia Spectrum. We were sold out, 19,500 people, and I got knocked out. So, you just, certain things you just can't. And in fact, at my stage show, I show folks the footage of that and how it happened and why it happened and so forth. It's just a rare oddity, a rare instance. When Munich, Germany, also part of my stage show, the night that Mick Foley lost his ear in the ring.
That's where I was going. That's where I was going.
That's one of my that's one of the most requested stories. But it's part of my set piece, Beyond Body Slam stage show. But I tell the story of what happened leading up to that, so that really no one should have been totally surprised. And then the referee, when his ear fell to the mat, flipped the ear to me. So I took his ear and I brought it backstage. And Ric Flair was in charge that night. So on my stage show, I tell you what happened when I went back and I said, Rick, I've got Cactus's ear in my hand. I mean, you can't predict certain things. So, that stood out just because of how abnormal it was.
What was the reaction of Ric Flair to you having Cactus's ear in your hand?
I'm going to just give you short answers to this because it's part of my show, and I'm not going to give you a whole lot of details here. But he was in disbelief.
Yeah, I can imagine. So we've got to plug the live stage show. But first of all, how did the idea for it come about?
When I originated and created the show a long time ago when my book first came out. And the reason for it was, number one, to promote my book. Number two, to give people a more, not everyone is a reader. So as an educator, I know folks learn in different ways. So this is an entertaining way of communicating some of the incidents, some of the zany things that happened throughout my career. Not everyone's going to pick up a book and read it, but they'll come out to a theater and they'll, watch it be acted out. They'll watch the video that goes with the story. So it was to sell the book and to also offer an alternative. This was way before anyone else was going out to do one-man shows. I created this back in 2002. And I've updated it since then. But so it was first of a kind.
How many live shows have you done with this particular project, and are there bookings into 2018?
Well, when I go to Louisville this Saturday, the 4th, it'll be my 13th show of the year. Queens, New York, the next weekend on the 11th, that will be the 14th show of the year. And I had done the show, as I said, back when I created it. So it's been a 14-city tour this year. And I've had inquiries about bringing the show to Texas and Philadelphia, Michigan, Virginia, but nothing has been. I sort of want to finish this this leg of the tour before I start concentrating on the business of 2018, and so nothing's been finalized.
All right, and take us through. Obviously, we want people to come out to the shows. We got to plug the venues and how to get tickets if there's still tickets left. But take us through what that experience is like.
The experience of performing the show?
The experience for the viewer and for you as the performer.
It's, there was an interviewer who came out to the Atlanta show a few weeks ago, and after the show, we did a Skype interview, and his reaction to the show, I thought, was better than anything I could ever explain, because, he had a different perspective. The show's gotten rave reviews, and he loved the show, but the things that struck him, the words he used, he said it was like an emotional roller coaster. He said it was like watching an adventure film. What I would say, what I had been saying, is it's a celebration of being a wrestling fan. And it's an interactive show, so I'm talking with the audience at certain times. And one of the things that I ask is, what brought you to wrestling? Like, how did you discover pro wrestling? And then I share mine. I mean, we're all fans. So I just take you through some of the highlights of my career. And as I'm telling you the story in a very animated way, you're seeing the giant screen video overhead. And you had asked about Gorilla Monsoon. In this show, I pay tribute to him. And you see pictures of him when he started wrestling. And he was the Manchurian Giant. He was just an unruly, bearded behemoth. But you're watching him on the screen with his family as a young father and grilling in his backyard. So things that no one has ever seen before. The McMahon family, I highlight the family with a family album. So you see pictures of the kids growing up. You see a young Linda and Vince McMahon with their kids, pictures from their wedding, things that humanize everybody, I would say. And once again, very rare footage.
I'm going to imagine a difficult guy to humanize would be the eighth wonder of the world, Andre the Giant. And having been in the New York territory for so long, you've got to have an Andre story or two, no? Well,
yeah. Andre's not featured in this edition of the show, although if I return to cities where I've been, for instance, you're based in Chicago, correct?
We're in Indiana, but Chicago's not too far away.
Okay. Chicago. When I was in Chicago, it was a terrific group of folks that came out to see the show. I would like to bring the show back to Chicago, and Andre would be one of the featured performers, topics. But yeah, I mean, I'm not sure why. I think you said that he would be difficult to humanize, and I don't understand why that would be.
Well, difficult to humanize in that people have their preconceived notion. He's so big, he's so larger than life, but I don't think people understand that he probably did very basic things like all the rest of us and had a human, very vulnerable side, I'm sure, while still being one of the largest people in the world and biggest attractions for several decades.
Absolutely. And that is what will make that segment a riveting segment, because folks don't think of Andre and the difficult life that he had because of his size, where wherever he went, people knew who he was. Or if they didn't know who he was, they just gaped at him in airports and staying in a different hotel room every night, never having a bed that fit. and taking a shower and having to hunch over to shower himself, never having an airplane seat in which he fit. It's easy to humanize Andre because of the huge contrasts and and yet he was he had a wonderful disposition, which to me is amazing. So in a future edition, 2018, when I go back to some of the same cities, like Baltimore was a great city, Pittsburgh, Chicago, I will feature Andre.
You mentioned earlier your book, which came out in the late 90s, or am I wrong with the timeline on that? But I know it was one of the first books, or the first wave of books out there. Everyone's got one now, but is it still in print, and how did it come about?
Yeah, you're correct. It was self-published in 2000. It was the first written of the new wave. It was the second published. Have a Great Day, Mick Foley's book, because Mick is a star. His book, he was able to get a publisher, and it came out that way. Body Slams was so successful in its first 5 years out that ECW Press picked it up in 2005-ish, 2005, 2006, and I added another third to the book. And it's still in print, and folks can get it wherever you can buy a book, Amazon or Barnes & Noble or your local bookstore. It may not be on the shelf, but you could order it anywhere.
And I can remember reading the book, and what I liked was that a lot of the hyperbole and the over-the-top stories were present in your book from a factual standpoint, but you were so real and candid with some of the struggles of being in the sport, and just, humanized. Hey, it's not always a fun business from a business side to be in, but at the same time, I'm glad I had the opportunity. The candor makes the book a must-read from my personal perspective.
I think one factor that makes the book different and attributes to what you're saying is that for many years, I always had kept one foot outside of wrestling. So I had a different perspective. For the first 15 years or so that I was an announcer, all of my WWF years with the McMahons, ESPN, and the beginning of working with the NWA, I was teaching school at the same time. So I did have a different perspective because I spent half of my time in a classroom and half of my time with, in arenas on the road in front of TV cameras. So it did give it a different flavor from other books that are out there.
Now, I'm curious, because I remember there being such a thing in the 70s and early 80s as commission referees. Was there such a thing as commission announcers and other attendees? I know a good bit of your work with at the time, WWF was in the New Jersey and Pennsylvania area, but were there certain states that an announcer or person of your level couldn't go into, or did that not apply?
It did apply. In the Northeast, every state had its state athletic commission, and everyone had to be licensed. Even from the ticket sellers to the referees to the announcers, the doctor, everybody had to have a license. Technically, a lot of the work that I did in Philadelphia at the Spectrum is on YouTube and the WWE Network, and folks, they get a very high viewing rate. But I technically wasn't supposed to be announcing in Pennsylvania because one of their rules was you should have been a resident of Pennsylvania, and I wasn't. But whenever rules needed to be broken, the McMahons found ways to break the rules and entice the athletic commissioners to turn the other way. So essentially, what they wanted went. So if they wanted me to be all of the syndicated television that I did over 8 years with the McMahon family, that was all done in Pennsylvania, and I did not live in Pennsylvania. So, which is why also folks often ask me, how come in Philadelphia at the live events at the Spectrum there is always another announcer? There were two announcers, and the reason was because one was the commission announcer. They didn't want to replace an announcer with me. They essentially added me, so nobody lost a payday for that night. That's kind of in the weeds, but
you must have had a keen eye for who would make it to that next level in wrestling and who wouldn't. Were there ever any guys that you interacted with over the years that it surprised you that they didn't reach that main event high star level, and any guys that might have surprised you that they went further than you thought they could?
Yes. There was a Brad Armstrong of the Armstrong family. He had everything. Now, why he didn't make it, I don't know the backstories. I don't know what his relationship was with management. I don't know, more often than not, it's not because of a performance deficiency. It's either you're not connecting with the audience, which was not the case with him, or there's something going on, like personally, which I would not have been aware of. But if you take a look at, let's just say the music business, it's not always the most talented that become superstars. There's so much terrific talent. And in your introduction of the show tonight, as I was listening, and I didn't realize this before I came on with you, that you focus on independent wrestling. And I think that is so important. I challenge my audiences at my stage shows, and I tell them, and I'll tell you here, that if you claim that you love pro wrestling, you have to get out and support independent wrestling, because that's where our superstars of tomorrow are coming from. And everybody needs to start. I mean, I was a bumbling fool when I first started announcing. I didn't have a clue as to what I was doing. Everything that you see at indie shows, it's not going to be great and it's not going to be wonderful, but neither is everything that I see in the WWE either. So it's so important to get out and support there are so many different alternatives that you'll find something that will appeal to you. It's more essential. I'll give you an example. When I was in the infancy of Ring of Honor, when I was doing their backstage interviewing, it was not that long ago. It was 12 years ago. And their roster, and it was a local Philadelphia promotion at the time, their roster included AJ Styles, CM Punk, Samoa Joe, Cesaro, Christopher Daniels. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Low key, I mean, there were younger, lighter wrestlers before it was in vogue for cruiserweights, that flew. Just think of it. It was just 12 years ago. And look where those individuals have risen, since then. So, independent wrestling, a huge, huge supporter.
And I think the love of the sport is transferable in independent wrestling from the performers to the audience. I think people can intangibly, intrinsically know when what they're watching, what they're seeing is somebody living their dream, and that's a valuable commodity.
Yeah, but I would have to also say, just so they have a kernel of talent. I mean, there are some folks out there that probably shouldn't be in a wrestling ring.
True.
But that probably was always the case, and it always will be the case. Like I said, there has to be a promotion that appeals to you. So a more discriminating promoter, is only going to feature wrestlers that have, that potential, and you can see that spark in them. You just have to pick and choose.
Do you have a favorite match that you got to be part of live, that you got to be at ringside for? And then another thing, obviously with the passion you have for the sport all these years later, was there a match that hooked you as a fan that made wrestling can't miss television?
Okay, I have answers to both of your questions, but normally when folks ask me, the most, the best, the worst, the least, I'd given you a number of 15,000 matches. Like, it's really difficult. But answering your second question first, what hooked me wasn't a match, and it wasn't wrestling per se. It wasn't in-ring action. It was Bruno Sammartino in an interview, looking into my living room, telling me that he needed my help and he needed my support. He was so sincere, he touched me. And as a little boy, I was a huge Bruno Sammartino fan. As far as matches that I really stick out as being part of, there were 2 series of 3 matches. One happened, they probably both happened in the 80s and then into the 90s. Earlier in the 80s, when I was still with the McMahon family, Philadelphia Spectrum, as I said before, it sold out, 19,500 people. 3 months in a row it sold out. When Superstar Billy Graham was the champion and Bruno Sammartino came back for his title. Not only was that the hottest ticket in wrestling, it was the hottest ticket in Philadelphia. It was there was incredible heat that emanated from that building. And then a little later in 89, and they may have gone into 90, it was the 3 matches between Nature Boy Ric Flair and Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. You knew that was special. And so those are the 2. They both happen to be 3 series feuds that were highlighted that stand out to me.
I don't think people understand today, and I tend to study the history of the sport from the before the rock and wrestling era, how much people like Bruno and Bob Backlund were icons for their age, for a group of people looking for heroes. Can you touch on that a little bit, the importance of being a champion in an era when people still looked for, that good guy feeling?
I think that years ago, it was much more personal. Your relationship with those wrestlers that you loved and those wrestlers that you hated, it was a much more personal relationship. It's not what, for instance, the WWE is seeking today. They're seeking a more groupthink, festival kind of feel. When a performer comes out and the music plays, they want everyone to be throwing their hands in the air at the same time. They want everyone to be chanting the same mantra of whoever, whatever applies to whoever's coming out. Back then, I think it was more, and today you're responding more with your head. You're thinking, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do. But back in the day, it was a more personal relationship with the wrestlers, and you responded more from your gut and from your heart. And I could make an argument to say that to achieve that reaction is more difficult, and it brings the art of the game more into play. It's not to say that they didn't, of course they had their promos and they talked. You found out about them, but it was only for a few minutes, an hour. It wasn't an entire 15-minute segment where you're watching 2 wrestlers spout off at each other in the middle of the ring with microphones. Back then, it was more of telling the story on the mat, not on the mic. And to me, that's more of an art form. Now, that is not to say that the athletes who perform today are any less. The wrestlers of today, the men and the women, in my opinion, are much superior athletes overall. You did have your standouts back in the day, but overall, they're just superior athletes. But they're doing what they're being told to do, and they're participating in the WWE's brand of sports entertainment. It's not the pure pro wrestling that probably you and I grew up on.
What's interesting to me is you and I share a commonality. Bruno spoke to you as a kid. To me, Bobby Heenan spoke to me about getting rid of, I believe it was the Bushwhackers, was the first live event promo I ever saw. And I thought, I had just seen them, and they threw to the old event center concept. And here's this guy, and he's loud and he's brash, and he's promised when they come to my local town, they're going to vanquish them once and for all. And I thought, you can do that? And as a kid, it was like, I got to see that because something's going to happen, and if I'm not there, I'm going to miss it. I don't think today's product has that same feel, whereas things are a little more predictable. And as you mentioned, it's a touring brand you might see in your hometown once or twice a year. It doesn't have that same weekly, you have to be there and follow the unfolding episodic nature week to week.
Yeah, that's not what's intended. If that is what it was intended, then you would know what all of the matches were in advance of the live event. Instead, they may announce like the main event, but then they just list who's going to be there. See, it's very different. It's like saying the WWE is Bruce Springsteen, and the performers are the songs you're going to hear. That kind of thing. It's not marketed that way in that most in the most visible promotion that we have. They don't want you to feel that way.
I've got to think that when you go and you do the one-man live stage show, some of the most passionate fans must come up to you with just fascinating memories, and it jogs your memory too and brings you back to the moment, no? Yeah,
absolutely. At the end of what I do is it's a set piece, but at the very end, as my encore, I do a question and answer. So, because obviously, and it's a 2-hour show, but I can't cover everything, and some things I move forward a little quicker. Some things I don't address as part of the 2-hour set piece. So that's a connection. That's a time for us to connect when folks ask questions. And then also there's a level of ticket that's a meet and greet. So I'm able to hear memories that individuals have from, when they were kids or teenagers or college students. It's you were the voice of my childhood. That I hear that often.
It's so weird because my first exposure to you as a fan myself was near the end of your WCW run, a few years before, and what sticks in my brain was the fact that Jesse Ventura, who I think everybody knows Jesse for good, for bad, for indifferent, whatever, between his wrestling time and his political time, but he was the color guy for WCW at the time, and he always seemed to go out of his way to make sure people remembered your name. And so because he did, I did. Is that something that he did on purpose, do you think? Or was that just part of who he was? Or was that just a professional courtesy? Because that's what made me remember you, was Jesse would always throw to you, and it was like, hey, you don't see that happen on, WWF TV, but you see that happen here.
It never happened on McMahon television. In the 11 years that I worked with them, they never said my name, not once, which was fine. I mean, the ring announcer is not supposed to be featured. That started happening when I worked with the AWA on ESPN. Larry Nelson and Doug McLeod were the commentators, and they would customarily say, let's go up to the ring announcer, Gary Michael Cappeta. When I came with WCW, Jim Ross, Tony Schiavone, Gordon Soley, Lance Russell, Bobby Heenan, Jesse Ventura, they pitched to me by name, and that sends a message to the folks at home that the ring announcer is part of the team. And I think that's what you picked up from that. They were very generous, because they have an opportunity to address the home audience directly. I never, on the air, I never do. I'm saying a name, a way, a place, giving you stipulations and so forth. In a live event, I have more of a relationship with the audience without the TV cameras. But, they were very, very generous in that way. And you're absolutely correct. I mean, that lifts the visibility of the ring announcer. Well, look at today in the WWE. Most times the ring announcer is cowering in the corner. They're not even allowed to be in the center of the ring. And all of their announcements have the same tenor. If you separate the music from what you're seeing visually and you just listen to the ring announcer, you're hearing the same announcement with different words over and over and over again. Like John Cena, Enzo Amore, da-da-da. It's so that, back in the day it would be, that dirty, like Samoa Joe. You color it with your voice, but that's not what's asked of the announcers today, at least in the WWE.
And I seem to remember, and maybe I'm remembering it from your book, you mentioned ring announcers off in the corner, not very well seen. There was a story with George Steele running you off somewhere, wasn't there? Or am I misremembering that?
No, you're correct. When I started announcing, like I said, for 2 years I was kept in the dark. George Steele terrorized me for my entire WWF career. He would hit the ring and chase me, and he was using me as a prop. And then later on, Jimmy Snuka would do the same kind of thing. And I would just run. I would just run to get away from him. Once again, the ring announcer is not supposed to be the focal point, but he was using me to elevate his own craziness, unpredictability. Although it was predictable because the people were waiting to see what would happen when George Steele came out and I was in the middle of the ring. But yeah, in fact, on my stage show, I show some old footage of George chasing me and Jimmy Snuka trying to take my pants off on national television.
Trying to take just to see that footage is worth the price of a ticket to the stage show. Because how in the world did that come to be?
Because he would just. There was one night in particular. We would do 3 hours of television a night, and they were shown 3 different weeks. So there was one night where he was on each edition, and the first time when he came out, I always used to wear a carnation boutonniere, and he ripped the flower from my lapel and he started chewing on it, and then he spit it in my face as I was announcing. Then the next hour, he stole my tie and was playing with my tie. And he was the last match of the third hour. And, after running from George Steele for so many years, I wasn't going to run anymore. It's like I was just going to, whatever he does, and I just have to deal with it. And, he wanted to, he started to undo my belt, my belt buckle. And I got tied up in the ropes, and I was hanging upside down. And those are the kinds of things people remember just because it's so wacky. It's just so out of the ordinary way of that they're used to seeing a ring announcer.
I'm going to ask you a very theoretical question. What do you suppose is a life lesson that you learned from your involvement in professional wrestling that you may not have learned elsewhere, but applies to, I guess, civilian life as well?
One would be that the only way that anyone ever gets to be good at anything, and maybe if you have the talent, master anything, is just by doing it. We all have certain ceilings in different activities. For instance, I'm never going to be the best swimmer in the world, but I'll be a better swimmer the more I swim. Remember, I never have had a broadcasting class. I've never been trained. I have no media degree. Nothing. I just got in the ring and did what felt right. And just by repetition and doing it over and over and over again, I created my own style. And that applies to anything in life. That the more you do something, the better you will get at it. And once again, it doesn't mean that you're going to be a superstar at it, but you'll rise to be the best that you can within your limitations.
If we gave you a time machine and you could go back in time to any wrestling match that is available on film, and you could be there as a fan, just as a spectator, to witness it, to take in the energy of the crowd, where would you go and why?
I actually, this sort of doesn't answer your question, but I was a fan, and I did happen to be in attendance the night that Bruno Sammartino lost his title after holding it for 11 years, when he lost it to Ivan Koloff in Madison Square Garden. It was the one and only time as a fan that I ever went to Madison Square Garden, and no one could ever imagine that Sammartino was going to lose his belt that night. Not so much for the energy, but for the lack of it, because people were in disbelief. And at the end of the match, the entire garden was silent, was just silent. And people were waiting to hear an announcement that maybe was going to reverse the decision in some way, and it never came. That was remarkable. That's what sticks out. And so I was the fan, sitting, up in the cheap seats when that happened.
There is legend and lore that there were people in tears that night and
There
just
were.
completely beside themselves and distraught. Can you recount that as a first-hand bystander?
Absolutely. Well, as I said, they were just in disbelief, and then you saw a cordon of police officers march to the ring and surround Ivan Koloff and get him out of there as fast as they could before people realized that nothing was going to change and that he was the champion. What I've learned over the years is that when the fans are not happy about something and they are screaming and they are shouting and they're on their feet and they're stamping their feet, there's no danger for the most part, because they're releasing their emotions. Times when I've been in the ring and it has been dangerous has been when there's silence and folks are beside themselves and they're not releasing that energy. And then I can guarantee you that there's going to be one person, and they're going to release whatever's built up inside them to do something that's dangerous, that's going to attack a wrestler, that's going to charge the ring. It's when your audience is silent that is the most dangerous time during a wrestling event, when things are not going the way the folks believe they should have, or if they're seeing an injustice happen and the referee's not aware of it, especially if it results in one of their heroes losing the match, or God forbid, losing the title. That's a very dangerous proposition.
Have you ever witnessed a fan? I know you said you've seen fans charge the ring, but have you ever witnessed a fan brandish a weapon against a wrestler, or was that before your time in the sport?
I've never seen that. Although I would say that if a fan doesn't have to approach you and be in your face to have a dangerous weapon. They can be up above and just fling, let's say, a penny at the ring. And if that penny, with the velocity that picks up, hits you in the eye, or in my case, in my eyeglass, that could be devastating. Plenty of times when people have thrown things into the ring, I got pretty good at having like in my peripheral vision where people would throw, let's say, containers of beer or whatever, of just reaching up and catching them. I don't know why or how, but they don't have to be face to face to cause damage, is what I'm trying to say.
All right. But the next few weekends, we want people to be face-to-face with you at your live shows. Let's give plugs as far as how people can get tickets and where they can go to do that, and the venues themselves. Okay.
I will be this Saturday, November the 4th. I'll be in Louisville, Kentucky at the Alley Theater at 7:35. That's Saturday night. The show has just been named as one of the top 5 shows to catch in the city of Louisville this weekend by the Courier-Journal, the main newspaper there. So I'm really happy about that. And then the next weekend, Veterans Day, November the 11th, I'll be in Queens, New York at Queens Theater. In both cases, you can purchase tickets at eventbrite.com. That's BRITE, eventbrite.com. Or you can go to my Facebook page, which is my initials, GMC, the number 4, Real, GMC for Real, and there are clickable links to Eventbrite and both of those performances.
Are there different tiers of tickets that people can purchase?
Yeah, there's a $25 general admission ticket, and then there's a $45 tier in which you get your general admission entry. You get to enter the theater early, so you get to choose your seat. You get a free Body Slams book. You get a free 8x10 tour photo. And after the show, we do a meet and greet with you where we'll pose for pictures. I'll sign anything that you bring, or I'll sign your book, your photo, whatever. So that's $25 general admission, and the premium meet and greet is $45.
Wow. And I can say if you were a little bit closer, I'd definitely be coming out to the show. I hope you wander into Indiana sometime soon. I'm even gonna say this: if anybody gets a ticket to any of Gary's upcoming shows and they email it to our staff, I will give 10% discount to any services through our company as well. That's how much I believe in what's being done here, because it's keeping the legacy of the sport alive.
Yeah. It wasn't until I saw your area code that that's why I asked if you were in Chicago, because when I was in Chicago in March with the show, I played a great little cabaret called Stage 773. And so that's why I just associated you with Chicago. But I'll come back. I'd like to come back to Chicago, and I'm not sure when, but this coming year, I would think.
All right, we've got about 4 minutes remaining. Any final nuggets of wisdom that need to be shared with folks before we close for the evening?
I would just say that if you're a pro wrestling fan, do not give up. Don't think that. And you know what? If you're a WWE fan, I enjoy it. I mean, it's an alternate from what I enjoy the most. But I tune in to see WWE, and I enjoy certain things that I see. There's a lot of good wrestling. I mean, the athletes, like I said before, are terrific. But don't give up. If that's not your cup of tea, there's Ring of Honor, there's Evolve, there's New Japan Pro Wrestling, there's Lucha Underground. I mean, there are so many different products. I don't want to lose you. I want you folks to be wrestling fans and continue to enjoy it. Because if you don't support, especially the non-WWE products, they're going to go away. And then don't complain. Don't complain if you're not out supporting them. And don't get so frustrated about what you see in the WWE. They've been telling you for 30 years that they're sports entertainment. They've been telling you that. They're real clear, and they've told you that they're giving you an alternate product. So it's like going to see Taylor Swift and being upset that there's no aria being sung that night. That's not what she does. But there are others that do sing arias, so get out and see them.
There you go. I think there's something for everybody, but even in a product that one does not like, there's something to admire about the athleticism, about the passion, about some facet of these individuals who dedicate their lives to bringing us entertainment and hopefully some sport too.
And remember that before getting to being so successful, all of those folks with the WWE and those that are struggling on the indies, they all struggled. It wasn't just handed to them. You just don't automatically blink your eyes and all of a sudden you're in the middle of a Ring of Honor ring or an Evolve ring or a New Japan. It takes so much dedication and so many people that are telling you, give up, it's never going to happen. And you just forge through it. And if you've got the talent and you've got that it factor, it'll happen for you.
All right. So let's close one more time with plugs, and then we've got about 90 seconds. I want to get those plugs in one more time, how people can contact you and how they can see the shows.
Sure. This Saturday, November the 4th, my stage show's in Louisville at the Alley Theater, 7:35 start. And then the following Saturday, Queens, New York, at Queens Theater, also at 7:35. That's on November the 11th. And by the way, this Friday I will be in Indiana. I'll be in Madison, Indiana to do a guest ring announce appearance. So I look forward to that too.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gary. Thank you to the people listening live or in the archive. We've got over 100 shows on the pro wrestling side, over 350 on our non-wrestling programming. So close to 500 shows for you to check out, all supporting underdiscovered talents in all walks of life. I encourage you to keep your feet on the ground, your mind in the moment. Until next time, everybody.